Hi, so we come to the 8th chapter of Graham Simpson, A Student's Guide to New Testament Greek. In this chapter, we will look at the subjunctive mood or active voice. Now, we are going to look at the present and the aorist subjunctive. All the verbs so far have been in the indicative mood, which is used for normal statements and questions. In the addition to the indicative mood, there are several other moods including the subjunctive mood. The subjunctive is used in a number of different ways, including purpose clauses, which we will cover in this chapter a little while from now. We will study the other circumstances in which the subjunctive is used in the later chapters. We begin by learning the forms of the subjunctive. Now, if you look at the present and the aorist active subjunctive of the verb luo, we look at this table. In present form, the verb luo in present subjunctive mood will look like luo, luomen with a omega, lues, luete, lue, luosin. In aorist subjunctive, luso, lusomen, luces, lucete, luce, lusosin. The subjunctive endings are given in the following table. They are the same for both tenses, present and aorist, and can be regarded as a lengthened form of the present indicative endings. That is, with the first vowel of those endings lengthened in some way. Look at the table below and see the endings. O, omen, s, ete, a, osin. Now, as we are talking about the endings, we should also look at the stem. For the present subjunctive, the stem is the same as for the present indicative, which is lu. For the aorist subjunctive, the stem looks like the future indicative stem. But in fact, it is the aorist indicative stem without the augment elus. Did you notice that? Dropping the augment and becoming loose. The previous point becomes more clear when we look at the subjunctive forms of a second aorist verb like lambano. Look at the table below. Present subjunctive form of lambano. Lambano, lambanomen, lambanes, lambanete, lambane, lambanosin. Aorist subjunctive form of lambano. Labo, labomen, labes, labete, labe, labosin. In this table, it is clear that the aorist subjunctive stem is derived from the aorist stem, elab, stem of elabon, which is becoming as lab. Now let us revise or recap what we have learned so far. The main points about subjunctive forms from the previous section that we have learned just now are: first, the present subjunctive stem the same as the present indicative stem. Secondly, the aorist subjunctive stem is the same as the aorist indicative stem without the augment. Third, the subjunctive endings is the same for both subjunctive tense and a lengthened form of the present indicative endings. We now need to look more fully at the aorist subjunctive stem and its application to verbs with the second aorist. Some of these verbs are quite straightforward, as in the case of lambano. In the previous slide, and the subjunctive stem is obtained by the simple step of removing the augment from the aorist indicative stem. That's all we need to remember. Now, if you look at the table below, here is the list of such verbs and the combinations of both aorist indicative and aorist subjunctive. Now, if you look at these verbs, I'll just go through them, a few of them, and the last few verbs from this table are of this chapter. For example, manthano in aorist indicative becomes emathon, and in aorist subjunctive it becomes mato. Pasco becomes epathon in aorist indicative, and in aorist subjunctive it becomes patho. Tikto in aorist indicative form becomes ethekon, and aorist subjunctive it becomes teko. Feugo in aorist indicative becomes ethugon, but in aorist subjunctive it becomes fugo. Let us move forward. However, with some second aorist verbs, it is not clear how to remove the augment. Some do not seem to have an augment at all. Here is a list of more difficult verbs, that is, verbs whose aorist stem you may not be able to work out on your own. There is no need to learn the list, but it is important for us to be able to recognize these stems when you see them in sentences so as to identify the verbs from which the word comes. Let us look at these verbs, which I call them as naughty verbs, which are irregular verbs and which does not follow any rules or regulations whatsoever. For example, let us look at the last three words. Let us look at the last three words. Lego in aorist indicative becomes eipon, and in aorist subjunctive it becomes eipo. The word hamartano in aorist indicative becomes hemarton, but in aorist subjunctive it becomes hamarto. The word horao in aorist indicative becomes eidon, and in aorist subjunctive it becomes edo. Now, we are going to look at something called the clauses and the predicate. What are these clauses and the predicate? And we will look at a particular word called hina. A clause is a group of words consisting of a subject and a predicate. I will explain that further in our learning in this session. What is a predicate? A predicate is a statement about the subject and contains a verb in it. Just remember that. Note the following examples with comments following. We have two columns, one subject, one predicate. Now look at the following examples. The man is eating. The man in the green shirt is eating an apple. The man and his wife are sitting on the grass. The men are shouting and arguing. Now, look at the first sentence. The man is eating. The subject is a simple noun and the predicate consists only of a verb, eating. The second sentence, the man in the green shirt is eating an apple. The subject is expanded by means of a prepositional phrase and the predicate contains a verb and an object, eating an apple. The third sentence, the man and his wife are sitting on the grass. The subject is a double subject. Did you notice that? The man and his wife, double subject, and the predicate contains a verb and a prepositional phrase. They are sitting on the grass. Now the fourth sentence, the men are shouting and arguing. The subject is a simple noun and the predicate contains two verbs. They are shouting and arguing. Types of clauses. Clauses can be classified as main or independent clauses and subordinate or dependent clauses. A main clause can stand on its own, that is, it is independent, but a subordinate clause cannot stand on its own, which means it does not make sense on its own but is dependent on another clause. The example given above are all sentences which we have done in the previous chapters have all consisted of main clause only. So far whatever we have done, we have dealt with the main clause, but from now on we will be dealing also with the subordinate clauses. Combinations of clauses. A sentence may contain one main clause only, or it may contain two or more clauses. If there are two clauses in a sentence, we may have combinations such as the following. Firstly, two or more main clauses joined by and or but. For example, the people went into the desert and John baptized them. Secondly, a main clause plus subordinate clause. For example, a main clause plus a purpose clause. A purpose clause cannot stand on its own but is always dependent on another clause. One of the ways in which Greek expresses a purpose clause is by using the introductory word hina, meaning in order that or so that. With the verb in the purpose clause in the subjunctive mood. There we come to the main learning of this chapter. The following is an example of a sentence with a purpose clause. Elthomen eis ten komen hina blebsomen tous apostolus. Now if we see this sentence can be translated in two ways. First, we came to the village in order that we might see the apostle. Secondly, it can also be translated as we came to the village so that we might see the apostles. Now note, the sentence contains two clauses, a main clause and a purpose clause, which is underlined. A purpose clause cannot stand by itself. It is a subordinate or dependent clause. In the main clause, the verb is in indicative mood because the main clause is an ordinary statement. Only the purpose clause has verb in the subjunctive mood. Thirdly, the tense of the subjunctive verb in the purpose clause is aorist. Did you notice that? The stem is bleps, which is derived from the verb blepo, being the aorist indicative stem, a bleps, without the augment. In this sentence, the subject of the main clause and the subject of the purpose clause are the same. When this happens, the purpose clause may be translated by an English indicative. Thus, the following translations are also possible in this sense. We came to the village in order to see the apostles. We came to the village to see the apostles. The tenses of the subjunctive. The difference between the present and the aorist tense of the subjunctive is not a difference in time. The present does not refer to the present time and the aorist does not refer to the past time, as we had been looking so far. The difference is that the present subjunctive refers to the author's perception of the action as being in some sense in progress, and the aorist subjunctive refers to the author's perception of the action as a single and unified whole. In the sentence given as an example, the aorist subjunctive has been used. The present subjunctive blepsomen with the present stem blep could have been used. In that case, there would be no difference in the English translation, but the underlying implication regarding the author's perception would be different. We come to the last bit of our learning in this session. The subjunctive is translated in different ways and in different situations. Now, whether you use may or might, it depends on the tense of the English verb in the main clause. Look at the following examples as we conclude this session. We come to the village so that we may see the apostles. Or we are coming to the village so that we may see the apostles. We will come to the village so that we may see the apostles. We have come to the village so that we may see the apostles. In the second sentence, we see we were coming to the village so that we might see the apostles. We came to the village so that we might see the apostles. We had come to the village so that we might see the apostles. The word for not in a hina clause and with the subjunctive verbs in general is may instead of u. And we will get familiar with all of this as we begin to work out our translations for this chapter. God bless.